Welcome to the What to Expect While Fostering and Adopting podcast show. If you're a foster mom, on the journey to adoption, already adopted, or somewhere in the middle, trying to figure out how to navigate the foster care system, wanting to grow your family through adoption, trying to balance everything, or stuck in that space of all things unknown, you're in the right place. What if there was a way to fast track your knowledge, prepare you for the good and the hard, and somebody who could answer that long list of questions I know you have? Hi friend, I'm Christine Marie, biblical mindset coach, adoptive mom, and previous foster parent of 77 children. Yep, you heard that right, 77 kiddos. I'm your host, and my goal is to help make your journey a lot easier by sharing my best tools, techniques, and skills that helped me pivot from foster care to adoption, fully surrender, and trust the process. I'm about to bring some calm to the chaos and show you how to navigate through this journey with a whole lot of grace. So go grab your cup of coffee and let's jump in. All right, you guys, I am super excited today to introduce you to a guest. This is James McLamb. He is the founder, CEO of Generation Youth, a youth live coaching program. He is also an adoptee. He adopted both his son and his daughter, and I'm excited for him to share that journey with you. Today, we're going to go a little bit off track. Normally, we talk about the foster care system, but today we're going to be talking about private adoption, which I'm super excited. There are many ways to create a beautiful family through adoption. And so I'm just excited to welcome you, James, to the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I do appreciate this. And I'm excited to talk about a topic that obviously is very close to me as someone who was adopted themselves and having my oldest two children adopted as well.
Yes, him and I connected prior to recording this podcast, and he shared a little bit of his journey. So I'm excited to hear along with you guys today a little bit more detailed story of his journey through adoption. So James, if you would just share with us your journey, what led you and your wife to adoption.
When we first got married, adoption was always going to be part of the way that we felt God wanted us to have a family. We didn't think it would be the first step, but we knew that it was going to be a part of it. Being adopted myself, that's a special part of me. I was adopted as an infant. I've always known about that I was adopted. I've never questioned it. I've never had any issues about, who am I or any of the questions related to that. I was very secure and confident in that I was Thurman and Marie McLamb's son, and I was very proud to be that. And it just was that I became their son because God put me in their place as through adoption. So it was always something that we knew that we were going to happen, that we were going to do. As you lay out your plans when you're young, you think this is the way your life is going to be. It was like, okay, we'll have 2, maybe 3 children, and then we'll adopt. Well, after several years of trying and going through in vitro and it not working and doing all different types of processes to try to get pregnant, we realized that it was not going to happen. And we decided that we would, and this was in, I think, the fall of 1999, last century. We decided that this was going to be the way that we wanted to start our family initially. So we went to a group called Amazing Grace Adoptions, an excellent adoption agency here in North Carolina. They had just started. They were less than a year old as an agency when we came to them and approached them. We went through all the processes. We went through all the background checks, the questionnaires, all the home studies, everything in this process. And then we just left it in God's hands and we kind of put it out of our mind. We didn't set up a room. We didn't constantly call or see what we're on the list. We said, okay, we're just going to live our lives and go forward with this and not work. We assumed and we believed that we would have several months or several weeks at least notice before a child was given to us as an adoptee. Well, that was not to be the case. In April of 2000, the Thursday before Easter, that Thursday night, I did not have to work the next day, so I went out to play ball that night with friends and was going to play all night and get home well after 10:30 or 11. My wife knew this. She was like, cool, you've been fine. You've been working hard. The spring's been hard. Enjoy the evening. I'm going to enjoy the evening by myself. So And this was in 2000. This was before, we had cell phones with us every second of our lives. So we went out, and while I was gone, the adoption agency calls, and they present us with an opportunity to adopt a child. And they needed an answer within, you know, 24 hours or less, hopefully in the next 12 to 18 hours. They needed to know quickly because the child was going to be born anytime in the next 24 to 48 hours. They weren't sure when, but they knew it was imminent. So my wife gets this information and she's frantic because she can't get in touch with James. James is off at a ball field. She's calling people that I'm playing with, and they were like, yeah, he was there a while ago. I don't know if he's still there because, he was going to go have go eat dinner with some of the ball players, and then they were going to come back and play another game. He's all over the place. I roll in a little after 11, not late. It was exactly what I was expected to be back in, but she's still up and frantic, and she tells me, hey, they've called. There's a child to be born. What are we going to do? I'm like, of course we're going to say yes. Let's just go. Yes. So we call him first thing in the morning and says yes. This was on that Friday, Good Friday, and we just wait. Saturday morning, they call us and say the child has been born. It's a little girl. You can receive custody of the child the next day. And if you're following along, you realize that the day that we received custody of our first child was on Easter Sunday. So we go to
Wow.
church on Easter Sunday morning, trying to keep our nerves. We'd not let anyone know because, there was still that in the back of our mind. Something's going to happen. My closest friends, our closest friends knew because we had had dinner with them the night before, so they knew. My sister had known because she had a daughter that was 2 months old, so there were things that she had. We had nothing. So there were things that she had, so we were like, okay, just be on standby if this happens. We're going to call you. I didn't call my parents. She didn't call her parents. We just kind of lay low. We come home from church. I take a nap. What else to do? It's Sunday afternoon. I'm going to take a nap.
Right.
My wife goes on a cleaning binge, cleans everything in the house. She cannot keep still. She's anxious. She's, just frantic about what's going on. And then somewhere around 2:30, we got a call that said, can you come to the agency? We have the child. So we went there and received the little girl. I could still remember going to the door. The door was locked. And I was like, oh, what's going on here? The door was locked. That was intentional. They wanted to have a presentation. They wanted for when they unlocked the door, they told us, we're going to unlock the door, count to 10 in your mind, and then open the door. They wanted to get out of the way so that when we walked up in the door, the first thing that we saw was the baby. And so
Wow.
that's what we saw. So we opened up, and there she was, and brought her home, started calling people. Called my mom first. Called my mom and dad first, and she was beyond ecstatic, beyond excited, and everybody started showing up that afternoon around 5 or 6, and then the house was full the rest of the evening as we began to call people and celebrate with them. And for the next 2 or 3 days, that Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, the house was just full of people celebrating the gift that God had bestowed upon us at that time. So that was number one. And number two is a little bit different story. He is 3 years younger than his sister. We actually met the birth mother. Let's see, we met her in February. He was born in April. So that time frame, she wanted to meet with us specifically. She had gone to the agency, looked through some books based on criteria that she had identified, and did not like anything. She was about to leave, and the agent said, we got one more book we think you might like. We're not sure if it meets what you like, but we like to do it. She opened up the book. She saw these pictures of my daughter and my wife smiling and having fun together. Then she read the little description that I was adopted, and she says, I want to meet these people. So we met with her and her mother at that February, and the very first questions were to me, which I anticipated that she was going to have questions for me. And her questions was, how do you view your birth mother? How did your parents talk about her? How did you view the family, the people who had given birth to you? So I was very honest and said, look, I owe nothing but gratitude. She made a choice to carry me when so many would not. She made a choice to give me life and then to part with me because of the situation in her life. And she gave me an opportunity to do things that I know I never would have been able to do and be a part of a loving family and a loving extended family. And so we didn't hear anything about her either. Never heard anything at all until a Friday. Let's see, I don't even remember. I think it was I don't even remember what day it was, but it was the day before Jacob was born. The agency calls and says, she's giving birth in the next 24 hours. You've been chosen. We'll call you when he's coming. She chose not to do a hospital delivery. Instead, it was a birthing center delivery. And their process at that center was to get the child with the family that day. So he was born like at 4 a.m. And at 1 p.m., we took custody of him. And at 2:30, he was at our house. So if you do the math on there, he was 10 hours
Wow.
old, and he was
Yeah.
sitting in our home. So if you've never seen a baby that early, most of the time, the hospital and nurses are taking care of. There are things that come out of a newborn, well, less than 12-hour child that you would not want to see. It's like,
Yeah.
okay, I understand now why nurses take care of them. So that was our first 2 children.
That's amazing. So let me ask you this. So you met with her, she asked you all these questions, and then you didn't know anything?
No, they did not tell us anything about. She had not made her mind up, her decision yet. She had a very unique situation. Her background was her situation was that her and her husband had a child. They had split. It looked
Mm.
like they were heading towards divorce. During the process of them being split, she got pregnant again. And after she had gotten pregnant, without knowing that she was pregnant, her former husband came back to her and says, "I can't live my life without you. I want to live with you. I want to live with our son." She tells him she's pregnant. He says, "Well, that's a problem. I don't want to have a reminder of this in my house. So if you keep him, then it's without me." And so she made the very hard choice. I mean, it was an
Wow.
extremely hard choice of, I'm going to give up this son this child, I don't think she knew it was a boy at the time, that I know that I will love, in order that my oldest son will have a father at home and I can have a family. So
Right. Wow. How selfless and hard.
I think, yes.
I mean, and in one aspect, she's giving you this incredible blessing of being able to complete your family. And also, I can't imagine the amount of grief that she experienced as giving up a portion of herself
Mhm.
to choose her other child as a prior. I mean, I just can't. That's a lot. So let me ask you this. What made you and your wife choose private adoption? Because there's a lot of different ways that you can adopt. You can adopt through the foster care system. You can adopt internationally. You could, I mean, there's a lot of options when it comes to adoption. So what made you guys choose private adoption on the state side?
Well, everything's all about relationships.
Right.
And we had a couple that actually, the maid of honor at our wedding, they had gone through private adoption. They live up in Virginia and had started getting their family. I cannot remember if their oldest they had adopted yet, but they were starting their family there. And then through our church, we became friends with some people who knew the founders, Amazing Grace, and they knew the struggles that we were going through that year before we made that decision, and they understood this, and they said, "Look, you might wanna go to these people." There was a lot of synergy there. At the
Right.
time, the founders that were running that were church attenders at churches others than ours, and since then, the founder, the one that is still there, she's a member with us at our church, so we see them every Sunday as a constant reminder of God's sovereignty in that. And we just love the name too, Amazing Grace Adoptions.
Yeah.
And incidentally, that was why our oldest daughter, the birth mother of her, picked that agency. She liked that because her grandmother sang her that song when she was a child.
Oh,
And
that's so
so,
sweet.
yeah, so she picked that agency. She did not have anything to do. My oldest child, her birth mother had nothing to do with picking us. She actually told the agency to do it for her, that she did not feel like she wanted to be a part of it. She wanted to have that separate. So they picked us.
I feel like for me as an adoptive parent, one of the hardest things, and both of my daughters are adopted through the foster care system. So I know it's a little bit different, but maybe not. For me, the hardest part is having a child, and I love that you were adopted too. And I would love for you to talk more about this. It's that hard piece of, this is my child. And what if they do want to have a relationship with their birth family? And then does that make me less significant? Does that make our family second to that family? And I know that's a lot of healing, right, that happens throughout this process. But did you ever struggle with any of those pieces, or did your kids ever struggle with that piece of, I want to meet this family? Maybe they didn't feel fully complete. I know I'm asking a whole bunch of different questions here.
Well, I never did as a child feel that way.
Okay.
And in our adoption process, I've never felt like that was going to be an issue with our children. If they were in desire to seek their family, I told them very early on, I'll walk with you through that process. No one is going to understand in this household better than me what you're thinking and why you desire to do this. My oldest has never had, or as it has never expressed in the desire to do that. She's never expressed that. I don't think it's because she's afraid that she would hurt our feelings, because she's very open about
Right.
things. So she would
Right.
say, "Hey, I'm ready for this." Even though there is some interest now that she's married and she's, looking at family. Hey, there's some medical things I may need to know. So there's some of that that's going on. My son, on the other hand, he has a little bit more perspective. I do believe he would love to do this. I believe there's a fear factor with him. I believe in some aspects it has affected his identity a little bit, in that there's been always this piece on him on why was I given away.
Right.
Um, Now there was a letter that his birth mother wrote him that we gave him when he turned 18. And so that helped explain some of that, and it's kind of squelched it some. And she gave him an emblem for a necklace that she had had. I think it's what was given to her when she was in the Methodist faith. He gave it to her. So he has that aspect of it. So it has identified those. So he may want to know a little bit more. I would almost guarantee you, though, he would feel more comfortable with my wife going through the process with him, because there's that father, that mother-son bond there. And if he's
Right.
seeking his birth mother, I know he would want to make sure he was walking along with her, with my wife, to make sure that there was no hurting there. There was no bad feelings there. I have found my birth family. Now,
Okay.
my birth parents had both passed away years and years ago, so I never got to meet them, but I have connected with 2 siblings on the mother's side, and have messaged, even though we've never talked or met face to face, with a brother on the father's side. So I've made those connections. And it was not because I felt incomplete or there was even really a desire, as much as it was as I wanted to have the experience so that I could shepherd my kids if they wanted to do this.
Right. How did you and your wife decide? When do we tell our children that they're adopted, or was it something you've always talked about? Tell us a little bit more about that piece.
Well, my wife asked me that very question. When are we going to tell Sarah Beth, that's the oldest, when she's adopted? And so I told her, I says, I do not have a memory of my parents telling me. I
Okay.
just always have known. So it was always something we talked about. So that's what we're going to do. It's going to be something that we're always talking about. So if we see someone pregnant and that we're close to in a family, and they're talking about, being birthed and stuff, we don't have pictures of you pregnant.
Right.
They didn't explain to her. God decided that in order for us to start our family, this is how it was going to happen. And so it became a part of the conversation very early on. There was not a sit down moment. It was just more of a drip. Let's talk about it a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit all along the way, so that it's normal. Because I just felt like, setting them down and having that conversation all at once could, hit a wall. I mean, they could just feel
Right.
bad, or why am I just finding about this now?
Right.
And then when do you tell them? So if you just drip it all along, and they just to say, hey, some families get together like this, some families get together like this, and this is how God chose for you to come into our family. And so it was just something that always was a part of the conversation, who we were. You would not know it otherwise. All 3 of the kids, 7 years after our son was adopted, God blessed us for my wife to get pregnant and give birth to our youngest daughter. And if you look at the baby pictures, all of them, I'll be honest with you, I struggle sometimes looking at the girls' pictures to identify which one is which. If it wasn't for the fact that I knew the styles were a little bit different, I wouldn't be able to tell you which one is Abby, which one is Sarah Beth, because
Mm,
they all 3 of them look a lot alike, and they all 3 look like my baby pictures as well, which I think is kind of amusing as well. So
that's so funny. It's interesting. We adopted our youngest first, and she had pretty reddish brown hair. You would consider her more of a redhead. And then our oldest, which we adopted second, was very blonde hair, blue eyes, super light skinned. And now both of them have darker hair. And they say, like, "How did this happen?" I'm like, "I guess maybe through osmosis. When you just live with your parents long enough, your
Well,
hair
this
just
used
got
to be
darker."
brown, and that's what color those, uh now Jacob, my son's is the darkest hair. His is almost black, but,
Uh,
they're all kind of that brown
well
shade, so
Well, and neither of the girls are biologically related,
yeah.
but it's funny because they look so similar that people
Mhm.
who don't know would say, "Oh, they're siblings." As you were growing up, you being adopted, were there any, like, big struggles? So other families who are maybe considering stepping into a private adoption or adoption in general, are there any things that your parents did for you or that you've done for your kids that made it easier?
Well, I think letting them know as early and as often and talking about it and not making it a secret or something that we don't talk about that much because we don't I have heard cases of parents saying, "Oh, I don't wanna talk about it that much because I don't want them to think they're not a part of the family." I take the exact opposite approach in that we talk about it all the time because this is the way God decided we were gonna have a family.
Right.
And so we talk about it in that context that, listen, of all the ways that we could have gotten together, this was so intentional. This was so providential. This was so divine in its way. There are too many things that could have happened otherwise. And when we're together, the five of us are together, the three of you guys are brothers and sisters because of God's plan. We made sure it's continually talked about in every single aspect of our conversations, never holding back on it, never, avoiding the conversation or anything and open, being open about questions if they have them talk about the good thing for us is that unlike me, I was almost 2.5 months between birth and adoption time. Their dates that they were born and adopted, when my daughter is, just one day over and my son, it's the same day. So we're able to celebrate those things at the same time. My mother, before she died, she would always call me on my adopted day, just
Mm.
like she would on my birthday. To her, that was, every single day. I would, if I got up out of bed and, if I wasn't at home, when I grew up and I was not at home in college and stuff, if 8 a.m. hit, I had not received a message from her. She would call early back before cell phones because she knew she had to because I'd be up and gone and she'd be hard to get in touch with me the rest of the day. It was about 7 o'clock in the morning. The phone would ring in my dorm room. I remember this in my I had just moved back into college because it was in August. I just moved back in. The phone rang. Working at camp one summer, I was at camp, and when I go to breakfast that morning, the director came up and said, "Your mother called. Wants you to call her." I was like, "Yeah." She says, "You think anything's wrong?" I said, "No, today's the day I was adopted. She's calling me for that." So it's something that we talk about all the time. That's the encouragement I would have to them, and I would suggest number one, embrace it, celebrate it, let them know you are here because you are divinely put here, that you're providentially put here. It was not an accident. It was not anything but God's hand in it. You could have been anyone. They chose us to come together.
That's awesome. I love that you're talking about some people call it adoption day, some would call it gotcha day. Was that something that was really significant for you as a child that your mom celebrated that?
Yeah, it was. It was pretty significant. I mean, I admit there's, that time frame when you're, a teenager and stuff that it kind of gets annoyed and old. I've always embraced it. I've always loved it. It's just a part of who I am.
I love
And it,
that. I'm definitely inspired by you to make some changes in that. Both my daughters, my oldest, today's her birthday, so she's 19. My youngest is almost 18. She'll be 18 in May. And I don't even know what day they were adopted because we just integrated them into the family and it's always been that
mhm.
they've been here. So it's interesting because I think I might, after talking to you, I might change that. And so I might make a little bit of a pivot on that because it is significant, and I think for me, I never celebrated it or even drew attention or even cemented the date in my mind because I never wanted them to not feel like they weren't here, if that makes sense.
Right.
like there was any differentiation, because our boys don't have adoption days. But I think that's something, like you said, it's predestined, it's significant, it's very special, just like you would celebrate an anniversary or a holiday. So I
Well,
appreciate you sharing that.
growing up, hearing my parents, especially my mother, tell the story of that day, tell the story of them waking up early and driving 3 or 4 hours, ever how far they had to drive. I don't know back then. Roads may have taken longer,
Yeah.
across the state to get me, and where they were, and the sights that they saw on the way, and, all the different things that she could remember very specifically, and then driving back, and their conversation on the way back, and this is before car seats, so I was in the floorboard in the back, didn't even have a place for me, and, there I was, and they stopped several times if I made any noise because my mom was freaking out. She didn't know what to do. He didn't even make any noise. Let's stop. What is he gonna do? Because she didn't
That's
know.
so special.
So those stories around that have made it a special time. And so, our children, we tell them story. We tell those story about, when we found out, what happened when we found out, what happened when we brought home, and the reaction of everybody around. Because, our youngest has a story. Our youngest, we know, when my wife woke up at 4 a.m. and said, my water just broke. And I was like, what? It's 4 a.m. Are you sure? It's like, what? And,
Wow, and that's a whole new experience there too. Even
yeah.
though you had 2 other infants, but you never went through all that.
So creating those stories around them, shows them how it happened. And it wasn't, I always had a big hole in my story of, okay, I was born in May 25th. I was adopted on August the 6th. Where in the world was I between that time frame? And it was only until this past year of connecting with 2 siblings and stuff that we began to the 3 of us began to, because I'm the youngest of the 3, piece together where the birth mother was, what was going on, and where was I during this process. And so I began to say, oh, wow, now I know, which was cool to know at this age. When you were younger, it was always exciting because you could make up anything you wanted to. You could.
What piece of advice would you give to a family, parents? Maybe they feel that tug that God's calling them to adopt. What piece of advice would you give to them as they step into this process? Or maybe if they're waiting in this process, what would be the biggest thing that has truly impacted you that you feel like this is my message to share?
Well, I'll speak to the second one about if they're waiting. If they're waiting, they're just going to need to trust God and to ask for his peace to live their life until he's ready for it. I have seen way too many birth parents anticipating a child, not birth parents, adopted parents waiting to get a child, and they're just stressing out. Why aren't we getting a call? Why isn't something coming? They said we might know something by now. I think I'll call them and see where we are on the list. Just is someone looking? Did I not do enough on my profile book? Did I do, whatever it is? They just need to relax and come. Believe me, I understand that is not that easy to do. I know I've lived through on both those times, but you have to learn to do. You have to learn to do it, and it makes that experience when the call does come so much more sweeter. It's not like, oh, finally, it's like a surprise celebration that happens.
Wow.
If they're considering it, God refers to his that he adopts us into his family. So it's a model that's shown to us in scripture. And so I believe those of us who are part of this, those of us who experience that, understand our relationship with God a little bit deeper. So embrace it in that aspect as well, because you'll understand, what God has done for you. Ask for patience, ask for your peace during this time, because you're going to need it. You're definitely going to need it. If you're not doing it, in the situation like I believe yours is, where you were fostering a child and then it's a desire to adopt him. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, we fostered and then we adopted.
Yeah, which that's just completely different than. And I would not necessarily advise folks to have the experience like we did of, Thursday afternoon. You're just a couple, and 2 days later you got a child walking in. I mean, that was for us. I'm glad it happened that way, because the anticipation of, oh gosh, I hope she's healthy. I hope everything's well. And when is it? Do you think she's on time? Is she going to be late? She's going to be early? All that kind of stuff. Not knowing, and then it hitting us like it did was just such an amazing time.
I love just so much in your story. And when I heard it, when we chatted before, it was just about patience, peace, and true surrender.
Mhm.
Because surrender is what I keep hearing. I mean, especially when you met the birth mom for your son and then you knew nothing. And then it wasn't even her who chose, it was the agency. It's just another testament of how God really has predestined all of this. Spending even 1 minute in worrying, spending even 1 minute in anxiety, like you were saying, all the things.
Mhm.
You probably experienced a lot of it with your wife being pregnant with your youngest. Is there's so many what ifs, so many
Yeah.
variables. And so it's just so beautiful. I love just that they were just so perfectly chosen and there was no stress. And it was just so much beauty in your adoption story. And I love that you were prepared your whole life for adoption.
Yeah. As I say, we were prepared for the first one. So.
Well, you were just so prepared, like, and your parents really set such a beautiful example, and I love that they showed you what it looked like to share with the child. I mean, with both of our daughters, we've never hid anything back. We've always just shared with them, and people have said, "Gosh, you guys shared too much with them." We're like, "Well, imagine if, your child's born with, let's say, diabetes, right? And they would always know they have diabetes. Like, you'd have to always be talking to them
Right.
about it. It's just it is. It's a what is. And so just I feel like there's just, you go with age appropriate sharing, right? But there's always a level that you can be open and share. And I feel like that's where children will make up stories in their mind and can maybe struggle with identity but you guys did such a great job and just shared with them from the very, very beginning, which I think is a beautiful reminder that if you are walking into this journey and you're considering adoption, just make it a natural part of the story that you tell of your child. And I love the adoption day. Did your parents call it adoption day or gotcha day, or do they have a name for it?
I don't know that mom really gave it a name as much as it is she just recognized it all the time. It was never like a cake. It was always just her acknowledging it and wanting to have that special moment with me when she did that. So
Well, I'm feeling like I might need to do a cake because it's been like 14 years at this point. Well, appreciate you being on the show today and sharing
thank you for asking.
your testimonial. And thank you for inspiring me to celebrate Adoption Day. And if you are an adoptive parent or foster parent listening to this episode today, pray about it. Think about, the testimony that James has shared and how you want to intertwine some of the incredible lessons that he has shared. Maybe you want to include those in your journey. But I just want to thank you for being here today and sharing your story. And you have definitely inspired me.
Thank you so much for your time and caring so much to ask guests to come on and talk about this. I do appreciate that a lot.
Hey friend, I hope that you loved today's episode. I pray it blessed you and helped you see that you have a friend in your corner who truly understands what you're walking through. If so, would you share this episode with someone who's been praying for a breakthrough in their own journey? It would also bless me big time and help others to find this podcast if you would leave a review on Apple Podcasts. You can also submit your questions, topics that you would like covered, and find a community of like-minded mamas in my private Facebook group by searching What to Expect While Fostering and Adopting on Facebook. See you next time.